Our special guest today is Joe Moss, COO of January Capital Advisors and connector at connector.org. Listen to us talk about RIAs and financial advisors, what not to do, the advisor tech stack, and Joe's predictions for AI. Welcome, everyone, to the AI Risk Reward Podcast. It's your host, Alec Crawford, and our very special famous guest today is Joe Moss, COO of January Capital Advisors and connector at connector.org. Welcome, Joe.
Thanks. I'm really excited to be here.
I mean, honestly, I think that pretty much every financial advisor I know knows who you are and keeps track of all the cool stuff that you're doing on social media, including like your podcast ratings and all that fun stuff. But let's start like further back in time here. And I usually ask about mentors, and we talked about that earlier, and you came back with this hilarious answer about how your first advisor boss basically taught you what not to do. So I'd love to hear like, hey, what are the rules for advisors? Like, don't do this.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I listened to a whole lot of the Kitz's Financial Advisor Success podcast and the XYPN radio podcast, and I had a pretty long commute. So I was like listening to them going to work and then leaving work. And so I had very strong ideas about like how financial advising should be done. And so it was surprising when, we were charging fees that were pretty high, or we had a tech stack that was hardly being used, or we had money spread across a bunch of different custodians, or we had trouble getting back to clients in a timely manner. Just like a lot of different things that I'm finding is actually more common than you'd think across financial advisors. But at least my first experience in the industry kind of learned a lot of things about maybe not how to do things.
Yeah, no, that's super important, right? Like, and some of them are actually deadly, right? Like, those are more innocuous. I'm more worried about accidentally revealing confidential information. Like, when I worked at a bank, I got an email to me with confidential information that was supposed to go to another bank. Like, oops, like in an email, like stuff like that happens, and you have to be super careful whether you're working at a bank or a custodian or an RIA about like how you treat confidential information, if there are ways to protect it.
For sure.
So you also mentioned John Swiston in the RA space. I'm kind of curious about him. I hadn't heard of him. So can you give us a little background and tell us a story about that?
Yeah, I hadn't really heard of him until recently. A few weeks ago, I think I met him on LinkedIn and started chatting.
Wow.
He's actually he did all the marketing for the Orion conference, which was just last week, I believe.
Wow. That's cool.
And he's just got a lot of experience across marketing, RIA, technology, and even today we were chatting on LinkedIn for like 30 minutes. Just
Wow.
I think we both have maybe non-standard views about a lot of things in the industry, so it's fun to just bounce ideas and strong opinions off each other.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And look, I think that, there's some incredible advisors out there, and then there's some advisors who, shall we say, shoot from the hip, right? And we're talking about, people's ability to retire and, pay their bills and things like that. And, we have to hope that all advisors take that, super seriously, right? And if they're not, then maybe they shouldn't be advisors. But look, I think one of the things that, we've talked about before more broadly is simply that, look, technology is advancing. And, if a decade from now, you're not using AI to kind of help you as an advisor, like you're gonna have a problem. You may not even be, in business. So maybe, or hopefully there'll be a little bit of a shakeout in terms of like, the good advisors get to stick around, and the ones who aren't as good, aren't really here anymore. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, there are definitely some strong opinions. I think there's around 300,000 advisors currently, and one guy was like, a couple 100,000 of these are going away in the next 10 years. And I was like, really? Um, so I think it is interesting, though, looking back, like how small the growth rate for a number of advisors has been. I mean, it's stayed around 300,000 for, I feel like a decade or two now.
Interesting.
Um, but also with technology tools, the Kids' map has around 500 tools on it, and a lot of people are like, "Is this map going to double in size in the next 10 years? Is it going to half in size?" And
Mm.
everybody's got an opinion, but it will be very
I
interesting.
can give you my
Yeah,
opinion,
I'd
which
love to hear your opinion.
it's gonna shrink, right? Like, and sorry to get on my soapbox here for a minute, but what I've seen happening is, and this, look, it goes in cycles, right? Right now, there are kind of single apps for things that are pretty easy to do. And a great example is, record a meeting and transcribe it and maybe push that stuff into your CRM. Okay, you got Jump, you got Zeppelin. You're going to have this rolled out on tons and tons of platforms, including Financial Inc., or we're obviously partnered with those guys. And it's just not sustainable, right? Because you can't be like, oh, I'm going to pay $50 for each of these 10 apps to do each of these 10 jobs. Like, not going to happen, right?
Right,
Longer term. So the alternative is you have these AI platforms with different agents that do different jobs, and you get all the agents with the platform. And that's kind of the model that I think's going to happen. And people might say, oh, okay, then I'll just go with Microsoft. They're going to have stuff for me as a financial advisor. Yeah, not so much, right? Because they don't really care about any specific industry. They're just making kind of generic tools like, like Outlook and Excel and Word. They're not gonna
sure.
solve all your problems. And by the way, like, the big guys are never gonna do the compliance stuff for you. Like, they don't care about SEC compliance or the detailed cybersecurity stuff you need to do, or governance around client data to do with AI. Like, you're gonna need a separate platform for that. And that's eventually what's going to drive consolidation there. At least that's my opinion. We'll see. Um,
Yeah, no, specifically AI note takers. There's at least 13, like specifically for financial advisors, possibly even 15 or 17. And one guy, Ben Olson of BMO Automation, he's like, only three or four of these are going to make it. Like the majority of these
well,
note takers aren't going to make it.
they also could get bought too,
Sure.
right? So they could
Yeah.
die or get bought or whatever, or merge together or whatever. So you mentioned a book from someone who has a great podcast, and I hadn't really heard of the book before, so I'm curious about if you could pitch the audience on Tribe of Mentors by Tim Ferriss.
Yeah, I think it's it's a big, thick book. I actually have it here behind me. But what I love about it is he was like, I don't know, he's mid 30s or something. He's struggling in life a little bit, and he's like, man, I wish I could like have a bunch of people I could go talk to that have figured this whole life thing out. Um, so he did. He made a list of a whole bunch of famous people he respected, and put together a list of like 11 questions that he would ask them. And, a bunch of them didn't respond. A bunch of them said no thanks. But a bunch of them did respond. And what's fascinating is like every chapter is just a different famous person and how they answer these unique questions, like how you deal with failure or stress, or what's something cool you've purchased recently. Um, you just realize that the most famous people in the world, they're still just people. They still deal with stress. They still get tired. They have, you know, too many ideas to execute on. Like there's all these different problems that they're all facing, and they share how they're dealing with them. And I just find it pretty
Yeah.
fascinating.
Well, it's the corollary to that is go visit Pompeii, right? It's now they've excavated 10 square blocks. You can literally walk into a house that's thousands of years old and looks like it's 100 years old, right? The
Wow.
paintings are still on the wall and the bowls are on the table and all this like crazy, crazy stuff. And those were humans, right? Like they were eating and drinking and hanging out, and they had all the same problems we have today, except for social media.
Sure.
So, um,
And AI.
and AI. Well, So, speaking of that, like, you have a personal rule, which I think is kind of cool, which is, no bots in meetings, right? So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think as AI increases, I think that human to human connection is going to increase as well. I kind of had this idea that like as AI can produce like better and better art and videos and writing, you'll still be able to tell the difference of when a human wrote it and when AI wrote it. Now, maybe that will get smaller down the line, but
Mhm.
um, I just like right now, you can just see your video and my video on the screen. When there's a bot, or sometimes there's three bots, or you'll join some calls and there's like seven bots. Um, I'm just like, I don't need bots. People don't need more to dos. People don't need notes. Like there are obviously cases for those things, but like in the meetings I'm generally having, it's like we don't need to record this.
Yeah.
Let's just talk and
Yeah, and look, there are also privacy issues, right? Like I was
sure.
talking to someone earlier. It's like, oh, hey, I'm an advisor. Do you mind if I record this meeting? Some people might not care, but you got a billionaire that meeting. They're like, no way you're recording this, right? Like, you can take your AI bot and throw it out the window. So, and a lot of that's around privacy, right? Like,
Yeah.
where does that recording go? Where does the transcription go? Could someone else get a hold of it? Like, what information could they use? I mean, AI privacy is a big deal. How do you think these different tools and AI tools that advisors are using are doing on the privacy spectrum?
Um, I don't know exactly. I think obviously some of them are sharing data, both with the AI that they're using to run the analysis. I think others are going super secure and like trying to keep the data on your local server. Um, so I think there's a whole mixture. There's some that are training their AI on your clients' meetings, and there's some that are not. So it's I don't know. Like if you use Zoom AI or one of the Fathom or one of those, like I think the way that they're using that reported data is probably a lot different than some of them like built specifically for financial advisors. So it's um, I don't know exactly who's doing what and how
Yeah.
they're doing it, but I know that there are definitely a wide range of how
Yeah.
secure your data is.
So it's read the fine print,
Yeah,
right? And obviously, look, you're a fiduciary, like you probably have confidential obligations as a financial advisor and RIA, like make sure your data doesn't leak out. Make sure, companies not trading on your data. You're going to wake up one day and be, pretty unhappy. I think privacy is, um, the way I'd put it is that AI is so cool and so hot that people jumped into a lot of things without the due diligence that they normally would. And I'm not just talking
sure.
about RAs. I'm talking about even the big banks, right?
Mhm.
They didn't think about governance, like they didn't think about risk management and encrypting data and hiding PII. They didn't really think about regulatory compliance, and they didn't think about cybersecurity. And all those things are going to be super important. And I think that those should be a big focus as you onboard different AI tools and questions that you need to ask. Um, so obviously, that AI risk is partnering with Financial Inc. to do all kinds of cool things for advisors, doing meetings and connecting with CRMs and doing pre-meeting summaries. What are some other kind of key use cases you're thinking about for advisors? For AI,
Of
obviously. Yeah.
of AI.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. To use AI.
Um, I think there's a lot of talk in the industry about the CRM being like the single source of truth. But I think that the CRM and all this communication with clients, and then the AI that can parse through it all, is going to play a huge role. Um, and I don't know that the CRMs in the financial advisor space specifically they don't have their own native meeting note takers yet. And so that's kind of what I'm looking for eventually, is for the CRM and AI and all the conversations taking place to all be centralized in one data
Yeah.
location.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that once that all starts getting centralized, I think a lot of these peripheral tools will go away, because um, if all your AI processing and all your data is in the same place, you just will need a lot less of
Yeah.
the other stuff.
All I'm going to say is make sure you go to Future Proof Retreat in Colorado Springs. You may hear an announcement about that.
Sweet.
So tell us about connector.org and how you got there and what you're doing there.
Yeah. So Connector, and it's Connector with a Q. Just so the spelling's slightly different if you do go to look it up. Is a program started by Derek Notman. And Derek Notman was a New York life advisor that decided he wanted to run a virtual practice. He wanted to travel around the world and meet with his clients way before that was widespread. So he actually started doing this before COVID, and then recorded a course teaching other financial advisors how to run a business.
Wow.
So teaching them what tools to use, how to do their online marketing, how to deal with compliance. And so he recorded a very robust course, and that was the Connector course.
Cool.
So that was the origin of it. In 2023, I was running Pro Advisor Suite, which was a advisor tech marketing platform, and he was offering tech discounts, and I was offering tech discounts, and he was moving on to another business that he's working on. And so I was like, would it make sense for me to purchase the Connector program from you? So that's kind of how it came to be for me. And I think more and more I'm just trying to adopt the Connector brand, even beyond like the course and the program that he put together, just like Joe Moss as the connector in the industry between advisors and technology and consultants.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
That's so great. And talk a little bit about January Capital Advisors, how you got there, who you knew, or if anyone, and what their philosophy is.
Sure. So January actually, so before, well, I didn't really give a background, but I worked for an advisor specifically. Then I worked as a virtual admin for like 6 different RIAs. And during that time, I actually met Jeff, the owner of January Capital. So that was several years ago. Then I went on to work for a CRM consultant for a year and a half. Then I did Pro Advisor Suite. And then Jeff was actually on my email newsletter. And at a couple of times he reached out and was like, hey, I'm looking for a COO. You're hired if you ever want the position.
That is such a great way to get a job, right? Like, you love my newsletter, Joe. You're the man. Like, you want to be my anytime, just open offer, just come be my COO.
It's an interesting. I think the new world we live in, a lot of people are going to build audiences in their or even communities, and their clients, their future employees, they're are all going to come from within these audiences or communities that they've built.
Yeah. Yeah, that's super interesting. You look at, Jim, who started the podcast, and Patrick O'Shaughnessy with Invest Like the Best, right? Like the number one investing podcast. Obviously, they were at O'Shaughnessy Asset Management, which is one of the first quant funds. So they weren't an RIA. They were, and they got bought by Franklin Templeton, I think maybe 8 or 9 years ago. And my co-founder, Frank Fitzgerald, who's our CTO, like worked there. So he knows those guys. But you literally go back and look at your thesis to do with them, like their deals, their clients, like everything came because of that podcast, right? And kind of the little mini empire, they built around it, absorbing other podcasts and advertising. And it's amazing. It's amazing. It's just such a, and the timing for that, because if you ask people 10 years ago, hey, can you make any money on podcasts? You're like, what are you talking about? Right? Like, and now there are people making millions of dollars as, writing on Substack or having a podcast or whatever. I mean, I think some of the top financial podcasts, a 30-second ad is 10 grand.
Yeah.
Like you could make real money doing that. I can't, but but they can.
Someday maybe.
Yeah. We have lots of listeners. I'm just not planning to do lots of boring ads. So think about the founders out there, whether they're starting their own RIA or starting a technology company. Do you have any advice for them or pitfalls to avoid?
Founders of like financial advisor founders?
Sure. Yeah. All right, let's start with RIA. So advice for brand new RIA. They've maybe been an investor or worked somewhere else. Like they're a solo shop. Like what's the advice? Because look, technology has got to be a big piece, right? Like
Sure.
if you're trying to run a company solo with no tech, like you're already dead.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. There's kind of four main categories of topics I write about: advisor tech, um, operations, lead gen, which is huge, and then people manage or hiring and managing people. Um, I think picking a niche is the most important thing you do. Um, and I think that you you pick a niche to start, and then you earn your niche. I've written about this a lot, but basically, you have to become an expert in a particular problem that certain people have. Um, so a lot of financial advisors, they're just resistant to the whole niche idea because they're like, well, I don't I don't want to limit my scope to just doctors or just CPAs or just dog walkers. But the reality is, once you become an expert in a certain niche, then you'll have a lot easier time getting clients. You'll be more valuable to them, so you'll get paid more. So I think figuring
And,
out your niche
and they're
is
less
really
likely to
important,
churn as clients too, right? If you know
right?
everything about doctors and how they need to invest the right way, like they ain't leaving. Where are they going to go? Who's the other doctor RA expert around here? Like no one, right? That's a
Yeah.
great idea. Yeah. Love that.
Um,
Okay,
I
so
think
so pick your niche. Okay, we got
yeah,
that.
pick your niche. I think a huge one is content creation. Um, and the more I think about it, the more I think that you're building credibility as you produce content, whether it's a podcast or a Substack or a YouTube channel. Um, you're building credibility within your niche, but you're also building credibility for yourself. Um, which is, I don't know. I'm reading this book, Creative Act, I think it's called. But it's basically, anytime you're making art for yourself first, and I just think it's a very interesting concept. Um, a lot of advisors struggle with sales and getting new clients, and it's like, well, have you convinced yourself that you're a good advisor, or that you can solve problems for this particular group of people? Um, so anyway, just an odd thought I've been having about that.
Yeah. And how about some pitfalls to avoid? So obviously, the opposite of pick a niche. That's a pitfall. Any other kind of pitfalls out there for brand new people, one person RAs?
I think whether it's your niche or your tech stack or your marketing efforts, I think focus is the way to do it, and I think spreading yourself too thin is the way not to do it.
Yeah.
Um, Especially in today's day and age, where you could spend all your time researching, reading, demoing tools,
Yeah.
thinking about niches. You've really got to take hold of your time and your energy and your money, and direct it towards something.
Yeah, you got to manage your time and set your priorities. I think I love if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So you've got to have
Right.
a plan. You've got to intentionally think about how you're going to spend your day. I know a lot. I don't do any meditating, but I do yoga once a week. You've got to have kind of be healthy, right? Like set those, especially if you're starting a business, you're going to be working on it tons and tons of hours. Like you've got to prioritize something for yourself, whether it's go to the gym or play golf or time with your family or whatever it is, right? Like super, super important. And then let's talk about some of the downsides of AI, in general, not just for RAAs, but, AI going rogue, like, or stuff like that. What are your thoughts there?
I think it's weird how some people are talking about AI. I think ultimately AI is just a computer program, and maybe I'm misunderstanding this, but it's just another form of technology that puts words in a certain order. But people are starting to talk about AI like he or she, or they're building these relationships with their AI bot, which I just think is weird. And I think that hopefully that will fade a bit,
Yeah.
because I think at the end of the day, AI is just another form of technology.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you go look at the stats, like one of the most common Um, Uses for AI right now, strangely, and for individuals, not companies, is AI companions. So it's definitely a thing. I agree, but you're right. Large language models are statistical models, and what they're doing is predicting what's the next best token or basically word or piece of word to add given everything else I know, right? Or everything else it has, I should say, that came before it, and all the model trainings and the model weights and all that good stuff, and the temperature of the model, which is how much randomness it introduces. Um, they're not thinking, right? They're not conscious. They're not your friends.
Right.
None of that's the
Doesn't
case.
doesn't have a
Now,
soul.
right. And now in the future, um, and I don't know how far away we are. Are we 10 years away from this or 100 or 1,000? We will almost certainly, because we're a very, very creative species, invent artificial general intelligence, right? Something that can become conscious. And maybe that's a combination between neural networks and quantum computing. I have no idea. Maybe it's what we call, I coined a term called composite AI in the 1980s, which is now starting to resurface when I was at Harvard, which is basically taking these different pieces of the puzzle and kind of connecting them in a way, right? Like, and think about the human brain, right? We have a uh, Broca's area, which does language, and we have an area in the back of your head, which is vision, and things like that. Well, there's no reason that AI couldn't be built like that, like little special things that are all connected together. Then all of a sudden, ta-da! You've got consciousness. I do think it's going to have something to do with quantum computing.
Hmm.
Personally, they some I think it was some MIT scientists just last year effectively proved that quantum tunneling is strongly related with human consciousness.
Hmm.
So I don't think we're there next week, but
Sure.
yeah, never say never, right? Never say never. Um, and how about AI? We can't predict what AI is going to do over the next decade, but we can think about what it might do to society. Because we know it's going to improve, and what are some paths you can see there, and what are some either good things or bad things that might happen to society based on AI, Joe?
I think, like specifically for the advisor tech space, I think the hope is that you take maybe 20 different tools and physically entering data in all these different systems, and eventually you'll maybe just have a few tools, and AI will do a lot of the work for you, and so a lot of the tedious type tasks will be able to be handled by AI, so that humans can either have a whole lot more time for more human to human connection, or they can just spend more time drinking bourbon.
Yeah,
um,
well, that sounds great.
I think it is interesting though, because like technology's obviously progressed enormously in the past few decades. And people predicted back then that we would, work much shorter weeks, and we would have all this leisure time. And it's done the opposite in a way, all this
Yeah,
technology and social media.
totally agree, and I think that, look, maybe it depends on the person and the country and things like that, but I'll bet you some people take AI technology and they go, oh, instead of having 100 families, I can have 300, right?
Right,
And others will say, I'll keep 100 families and work 10 hours a week,
right,
right? Like, I think you're going to see both. And I think that a lot of it depends on, what's your environment. You own your own shop, or did a venture capital firm just buy 20% of your RIA and they're
sure.
standing over you going like, where's my money? So anyway, and that's kind of interesting too. Like, so how long is this whole VC, this investing trend gone on? Because I don't remember this 10 years ago. Venture capital firms and PE firms running around buying big chunks of RIAs. Like, when did this really start in earnest?
I suppose it has something to do with AUM, because assets under management is basically a recurring revenue model like SaaS.
Yeah.
And I think that when they realized that they could value RIAs at a multiple based on the recurring revenue, then they realized that they could buy it, optimize it, and sell it.
Yeah. Wow.
Re- So
So this is gonna continue is what you're saying. Yeah. It's
probably,
interesting
yeah,
though, because it's not like a regular business. Like you do have to continue to incent the people working there with, equity and part of that stream. Otherwise, if you bought 100% of it, what's the advisor gonna do? Like take a nap, right? Like, they have no skin in the game anymore. So it
sure.
is interesting. You do have to be there's it's a delicate calculation. And Joe, tell us about your book that's coming out.
Yeah, for sure. So I love studying advisor tech and researching advisor tech and demoing tech. Um, and the Kits' map, which a lot of people are familiar with, has about 500 tools on it. And so one day I had an idea. I was like, why don't I go through all his categories? It's around 36 categories, and pick my favorite tool in each category. Like if I could build a tech stack from scratch, which tool would I pick in each category? Um, so I did a blog post about it, and some people were like, I don't actually think it's a very good idea to start to build a tech stack from scratch this way. They're like, shouldn't you start with like who the clients are or what your services are? And I was like, I'm having fun. Let's just pick a tech stack. So then I heard a podcast about a guy saying you could write a book in 6 weeks. So I was like, I love advisor tech. I've already done this blog post. Like, could I turn this blog post into a book? So hence the advisor tech book was born. Um,
Amazing. Did it really take 6 weeks?
yeah, no, I set the date 6 weeks from the day I had the idea, which was February 20th. Today's February
Um,
13th, and we actually,
amazing,
yep.
amazing. And how does it work in terms of publishing? Is this one of those things so people go on Amazon and click I want a book and it prints and ships? It's not like you're printing like a million copies and praying someone buys them, right?
No, yeah, I'm using Kindle Direct Publishing, which has been an
Nice.
amazing experience. It's super easy to do.
That's great. All right. Well, congrats on that.
Yeah, thanks.
So the last part of the show is our lightning round where we do underrated or overrated. Of course, you can say fairly rated if you want.
Okay.
But I'm going to kick it off with living in Lexington, Kentucky when it is not snowing, underrated or overrated?
So I'd say underrated. I think Lexington is a truly lovely place to live. There's all the horse farms, just beautifully manicured all around the city. There's a ton of great restaurants to eat. There's the bourbon trails. You can visit the different breweries and things like that.
Yeah, that sounds fun. How about doing a puzzle like Wordle or a crossword puzzle every day? Underrated or overrated?
I'm gonna say overrated. I'm not really into that kind of thing.
And let's see, the TV show The Office, underrated or overrated?
Overrated.
Horseback riding, underrated or overrated?
Um, I'd say underrated. I think horses are pretty magnificent animals. And I mean, there's a huge racing culture around here, but I think they're expensive. But I think they're a lot of fun to ride.
Going screen free for part of a day, and I'm including one's kids there too. Underrated or
Um,
overrated?
Underrated. Yeah, I think anti-technology type things are gonna really grow over the next 20 years.
Yeah. The Age of Empires video game, underrated or overrated?
I like Age of Empires. I still play Age of Empires, and with my son sometimes too. So I'd say underrated.
Vegetarian chili, underrated or overrated?
Interesting. Um, I'll say underrated. I think I've had some pretty good vegetarian chili.
Hmm. Pappy Van Winkle 10-year-old bourbon, underrated or overrated?
So I don't actually know because I don't think I've actually had Pappy Van Winkle. It's pretty
Neither,
rare,
neither,
right?
neither, neither have I. But had to ask the question. You're in
Yeah.
Kentucky. All right, so we don't know. All right, we'll have to do another show where we actually get to taste it, and then we can respond to that.
So I don't
Uh,
know if you've seen this, but people will line up outside of liquor stores around here, like with their folding chairs for like, you know, 50 feet. When something's being released, they'll literally like camp out and wait until they can buy a bottle. It's pretty interesting.
that's pretty cool. Hiking the Appalachian Trail, and I'm not talking about for months. I mean, like a couple days or a week. Underrated or overrated?
I'd say underrated. Probably some people should do more, right?
Absolutely. Get outdoors, do some hiking.
Yep.
And finally, the TV show MASH, underrated or overrated?
I think it's underrated. I've watched it with my wife through many, many times, and it's still funny just about every time.
Yeah, it is a great show. Anyway, awesome. Joe, thank you for coming on the show. This has been Joe Moss, COO of January Capital Advisors and connector at connector.org. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been fun.